Welcome, everybody. And in particular, our special guest, Gary Klein. I'm honored to have Gary in this webinar with us this evening. And thank you very much, Gary, for giving your time to be with us. And
Thank you.
I thank our audience for their interest and for their participation. In this webinar, we will talk about naturalistic decision making in two parts. In the first part, we will focus on NDM applications. And in the second part, we will focus on practical decision making, which is a masterclass Gary has put together recently. Now, in the first part, for the audience who has not been familiar with the NDM, I will ask Gary to review us what is the purpose of NDM training and how NDM accomplished this in a couple of minutes so that people can follow the rest of the webinar. And here I will bring the slides for that. Okay, Gary, this is something you can start talking about.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And again, Mete, thank you for inviting me to be involved in this webinar.
Welcome.
And I helped to initiate the naturalistic decision-making community several decades ago in the late 1980s. And we initiated it because we wanted to understand how people made tough decisions under time pressure and uncertainty and factors like that in real-world settings. A lot of the research on decision-making up to that point had been done in laboratory settings with artificial tasks that were completely novel to the college students who were being run through the tasks. And we weren't sure that that really captured what happened outside of that setting. And we wanted to investigate it. And that meant we had to work in natural settings. And so the community that I work with has explored how people handle tough decisions in settings like aviation or petrochemical industry or nuclear power plants or military contexts or law enforcement or medical situations. So we go into these environments where it's not possible to tightly control the factors, but you can capture what's going on, particularly as people develop expertise. And that was a problem with the laboratory settings because you didn't have time to really train people very much in the tasks that were being presented. Whereas in natural settings, in real world settings, people have months and years and decades of experience, and that's the basis for their expertise. And what they're doing during that time as they build expertise is they're gaining tacit knowledge. So in order to do this kind of research, we had to develop techniques to do a variety of things. And so you see in this figure, we have to capture their tacit knowledge. And we capture it usually, sometimes by observation, but usually by interviewing them about how they handled real problems, real incidents that were often consequential incidents, maybe life and death incidents. And we had methods of cognitive task analysis, such as a critical decision method, to capture how they handled these kinds of situations, what their options were that they had available to them, how they selected or identified a course of action, how they understood what was going on in the situation, how they knew what to pay attention to, and how they generated expectancies and goals. Those were the things we tried to capture. Then we try to turn what we learned into scenarios. And the scenarios could be used in a variety of ways. And the scenarios could be used to train other people. And this would give other people vicarious experience by going through these kinds of actual events to see what they would do, how they would handle it. Or the scenarios could be used in order to assess people to see how they matched up to the experts that we had interviewed. One of the scenario techniques that we've developed that we've been using a great deal is called shadow box. And shadow box is a technique for helping people to see the world through the eyes of experts without the experts having to be there. Often the shadow box is in the form of a text-based scenario, but one of the forms that we've developed to deliver the training is video-based, as you see in this slide. And so here's an example of a video that we used from a hospital setting, a healthcare setting. And the patient is not a real patient. The patient is a dummy, and you watch the nurses on the left and right administering to the dummy. You see them, how they handle it and how they maintain a sterile environment. And you see what you can notice if you're going through the training, but then you get to compare what you notice to the experts who've watched the same thing and are picking up things that you miss. And that's how you can make that kind of discovery. And the experts don't have to be there to train you. The experts go through the scenario, they capture what they think is going on, and then that becomes available as feedback to you as you go through the scenario. So the experts are only there at the beginning, so you make efficient use of the experts. On the right is yet another example of this technique, and we call this the expert eyes technique of relating to a way of expertise. And it's using these videos, you're watching what's happening, and as the video continues, you can just take a pointer and focus it. You see in this video on the right, that little green circle, something is going on there. And so the person clicked on that area because they thought something significant was happening there. Then they would write why they did it, what their rationale was. And then after you finish going through, you find out where the experts clicked, what they were picking up, what cues they were noticing, and why they thought those cues were important. So those are the kinds of training tools we've been developing. Okay?
Thank you, Gary. And I want to go to my first question. You have applied these training tools to a wide spectrum of applications, but one took my attention was that you had a very clear measurements with the operator centers that how that it improved operator performance. Can you please give us some examples of how NDM tools improved operator performance in such control room applications?
Yes, I can, but I don't want to oversell what we found. So we have not had many opportunities to show that our training programs improve performance. We've had some. One of those was let me see if I can capture the project. It was with a nuclear power plant, and they called us in because they were having some trouble when the nuclear regulatory commission assessed them, and they were found to be wanting, and they were worried because if they continued to show substandard performance, they would have to undergo additional training and evaluation. It could cost them up to $1 million a year. And so they were highly motivated to improve their performance. So we sent our observers in to see what was going on. And this wasn't just general operations, it was during crises, simulated crises. So our observer team went in, watched them in action, and saw what was going wrong, that they were inefficient, that the organizational structure was misaligned. But mostly the biggest thing that was going wrong is the Emergency Operations Center, which was a large room, and they were so desperate to do well that they packed everybody they could into the room, and the room was just so crowded it was hard to hear yourself think, and it was hard to coordinate with others and to essentially work together as a team. So surprisingly to them, they thought we were going to say you're ineffective and you need more people, and they were going and they would respond, we can't fit any more people into this room. But instead, we said, you have too many people. You have too many non-essential people. So over the course of several months, we took 80 people were crammed into this room, and we figured out who were the important people, and we removed the others. And over the course of a few months, we whittled it down from 80 down to about 35 or 40. And we could have reduced it further, but they got nervous. And they actually did a better job with the 40 people than they had with the 80 people. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came in and evaluated them again, and they did awfully well. And they were told, no more, you don't have to worry about any kind of sanctions. You're a much higher performing team than you were before. So that's one example of performance, but I don't have specific data. If you want data, we've conducted studies not of performance, but of how people match their responses to experts. And I'll read you some of the data that we have. With firefighters, using these kinds of scenarios that I described before, in a day of training, and we gave them four scenarios using Shadowbox, we found an 18%, or Neil Heinz found an 18% improvement in performance, a better match to the experts. In a military situation with Joseph Borders, again, 4 Shadowbox scenarios, in 3 hours, only 3 hours of training, we found a 28% improvement in performance. Another study we did with, let's see, with nurses, and a half a day, we got a 27% improvement in performance in a half a day, compared to the experts. In a petrochemical plant situation with these kinds of scenarios, in a half a day, we got a 26% improvement in the accuracy of recognizing the problem, and a 32% reduction in the time needed to identify the problem. Those are the kinds of effects that we're able to demonstrate.
Thank you, Gary. They are really very impressive numbers. Of course, I remember Chernobyl accidents. In that case, after some analysis, they put the blame on a young engineer, young control engineer. He was 25 years old, and he was working there only for 3 months, and he made a mistake. I don't know if it was true or not, but nonetheless, it's possible that a young person can make a mistake. So, especially in this nuclear power plant control case, even 1% of improvement could mean a lot. Now, this brings us to my next question, Gary, and I want to get your idea about how NDM helps us with extreme teams. Extreme teams are teams which work under challenging conditions. And because NDM is a quick response skill, I was wondering if NDM has contributions in that area.
Definitely, we have contributions because we study not just individual decision makers, but we also study teams, especially in extreme environments such as military, petrochemical, emergency departments, and so forth, as you can see in the illustrations here. So we try to see how the teams are working. Well, we've also had opportunities to present different teams with the same scenario and see which ones are effective, which teams fall apart, and why they fall apart. And what we have found a number of years ago when we've conducted these studies, we found that a common reason that teams fall apart is people aren't really sure what their role is, what their function is. And so it's not, they don't know who's supposed to do what, especially when the situation gets challenging and unexpected events happen and they have to adapt and improvise. So a key for extreme teams in emergencies is to be able to adapt to unexpected events. And you can't train people for all kinds of emergencies, but you can train people to understand what their role is on the team and who knows what and who to defer to and who's going to defer to you. And you can build up that kind of team expertise. The first demonstration of this was a number of decades ago in the aviation community. And it wasn't even a study of team performance. Um, this was a study of fatigue. And they said, let's bring in, they had a high fidelity simulation. Let's bring in teams and see how they do. And over a period of 8 hours, and they expected as the time increased, the teams would become fatigued, and they thought there would be a significant difference at the end of the 8 hours than at the beginning. And there was a significant difference. But the difference was, even after 8 hours, teams did better at the end of 8 hours, not worse, because they had learned to work together. So we've studied these kinds of teams in order to see how to develop it. I don't think you need high fidelity simulations. I think you can train this kind of teamwork and team understanding and what we call a team mind, even with low fidelity situations where you have scenarios that are realistic.
Thank you, Gary. Talking about the team, I want to move to my next question. And I had a slide about this. Let me go back to screen sharing. Now, here is a boardroom. And in boardrooms and in top-level managements and in fact in meetings in general, people sometimes tend to keep their intuitive ideas inside. They don't want to talk about it because it cannot be justified. That's the definition of intuition. So my question to you is how NDM training helps us expressing intuitive ideas and develop team intuition.
Right. So we demonstrated this a number of years ago in a project where using a garden path scenario. We had 7 different teams that we studied, and we gave them a scenario. And a garden path scenario is at the beginning of the scenario, there's something obvious that's going on. So everybody assumes that's what the issue is, but that's not the issue. And you want to see, when does the team come to its senses and realize something else is going on? And we dribble in cues. That's why it's a garden path. As they go along, they get more information and they realize, okay, we've misidentified it. And the results were clear. Of the 7 teams that we studied, we wanted to see when they got off the garden path. Not a single team got off the garden path. They held on to the initial mistaken idea all the way through. So that was discouraging. But these were 4-person teams. We had each individual keeping notes on a laptop of what they thought was happening. And this was the shocker. In every team of every one of these 7 teams, at least one person, sometimes 2 people, noticed the discrepancies and started to get worried. So it was there. If you think of a team mind, this was in the subconscious of the team mind, but those people never said anything. So we've demonstrated what you raised. We know that it's an issue. How do you get people to disinhibit? One of the techniques that we've used is a pre-mortem technique, where you have people look in a so-called infallible crystal ball, and we tell them, if this is the start of the project, everybody's ready, the planning is done, and I'm looking in the crystal ball, and the crystal ball is showing me that the project has failed. Now, everybody has 2 minutes to write down why it failed, and people start writing like crazy. And so this disinhibits them. It creates some psychological safety, and it creates a competition to come up with new ideas why it failed. Whereas usually people don't want to speak out. Now they're encouraged to speak out. So there are ways of doing it.
Mhm. Thank you, Gary. I also read in one of your articles that team intuition is something to do with mental models shared by the team members. And if I understand it correctly, how can a team have a consensus on which mental model to have?
I think that's the wrong question.
Mm.
I don't think you necessarily want the whole team to have the same mental model. That's impossible because each team member has his or her own experience. And that gives you diversity in the team and allows some team members to notice things that others would not because of the experience that they bring. But you do need to have some sort of calibration, which we would call common ground, and you want to build that common ground. Even if I don't agree with what you're saying, at least I have to know what you're saying so that we can coordinate. So what you do is try to build common ground. And some teams overdo this. And I've seen this personally in a project involving an energy production facility with nuclear materials. It was a simulation, and the team leader kept saying, "Time out, let's calibrate what we know." And he was calling these timeouts so often, it was getting in the way of their performance. So you have to know when to calibrate. But more important than that, you have to be listening to pick up the early signs that there's some dangerous miscalibration so you can correct it. So that's a skill that we think you can develop.
Thank you, Gary. My next slide is bringing us to a very important situation. I want to talk about it. Now, in 2023, which is last year, the situational room of White House was redesigned, and you led one of the design teams. And of course, this is the room where decisions are taken. Maybe it will change the course of the history. And I didn't know before I researched that actually it was a huge complex. There was 3 meeting rooms, there was a huge control center, and there were 130 national security officers at work to run this complex. And I'm just curious how cognitive psychology helped in the design of a situation room. And I'm also wondering, was there a concern with the design to create an environment which is conducive to intuitive thinking?
Okay, so first of all, let me correct something on the slide. I was a part of a design team. I did not lead the design team.
Mhm.
I was part of it along with
Okay.
some of my colleagues. So I don't want to create any confusion. And second, I really can't talk about the White House Situation Room, but I can talk about other kinds of meeting rooms that we've worked in. And one of the things that we've observed, and when we go into these large kinds of team collaboration rooms, is people think that everybody needs a common picture, and they have these large screens to have a common picture that everybody can work on. And when I've observed these teams, everybody's at a workstation with their own personal computer, and then there's a common picture up front. Nobody ever looks at the common picture, because if it's a common picture, it eliminates all the details that would get in the way. And the people need to see the details. So this notion of having a common operating picture, I think, is counterproductive. I think what you want to do is try to understand how to configure the individual workstations so that people have the information that they need, but also to make sure that they understand who the other players are. Very often, people just come in and they're taught their job, and they don't know who's using the information or where I'm getting the information from. And so that there's a breakdown in coordination. And I think with training, you can help the team understand how to work together as a coordinated unit.
Thank you, Gary. Now, I want to build upon your experience with huge organizations such as governments, state governments, police organizations, military, etc. And based on your experiences, you had a number of articles, and you said that in such organizations, it's not sufficient to improve procedures. There's a need for more. And this especially becomes a concern in case of natural disaster situations, because in a natural disaster, hundreds of units need to be coordinated, and logistics, distribution of materials, etc., and the units themselves need to be trained to have an effective response to the natural disaster. So my next question is related to that. Let me bring my slide about it. This one. Now, here are two natural disasters. One is earthquake, which happens in my country once in a while. And the second one is wild forest fires. And I'm just wondering how NDM can be used to capture tacit knowledge for the coordinating part in response to such natural disasters and in field response.
Okay, and that is a great question, because very often when people prepare the responding organizations, they feel that what they need to do is come up with a series of checklists or standard operating procedures and have everybody, or in the military, it would be military doctrine, and have everybody learn that so that everybody can be well coordinated. And those are important. Those are necessary. Those are essential, but they're not sufficient. And that's where organizations get fooled, is they think if we can just have more detail in the standard operating procedures, then we'll be better off. But the more detail they add, the more incomprehensible the materials become. Miller and Jameson did a study in petrochemical plants where they had standard procedures, and they found that at a certain point, the people in the plants were not helped by the additional detail, and they knew how to do their job. And you said, well, here's the standard procedures. And they said, but the standard procedures are always getting updated. They're getting modified. They're getting revised. So nobody's really sure. If I'm coordinating with you, Mete, and we're using standard procedures, which version of the standard procedures are you referring to? And I might be using a different one, and we don't have time to work it out. What we need is for the teams to develop expertise in order to adapt. And that could be done by running drills high fidelity simulations, but particularly low fidelity simulations where you introduce anomalies, unexpected events, and see how people can work around them. So they get used to working around the procedures rather than feeling that their job is just to carry out the procedures. That's the shift. That's what naturalistic decision making tries to add, is this adaptive capability.
Thank you, Gary. My next question is in the same lines. Again, something to do with big organizations. And I read that you have once trained 150 nurses all at the same time using NDM tools. And there were some mention about police officers. There were like 77,000 of them, which could potentially be trained. And of course, you have experience, large experience in the military applications. And I'm just wondering, how NDM helps with large-scale training of people. For instance, new recruits to the military, can they be speed trained to be combat ready in a faster time frame?
All right. So when we've addressed this issue, especially in the early days of the pandemic, where it became very difficult to get people to come together into a training facility, like you're showing here, we didn't have those kinds of classes because people weren't supposed to be gathering in those kinds of groups. So we took our shadow box methods and put them online. And we tailored them with the feedback so that we had individualized training. And we did that with the nurses. We didn't have it online at that point. We just had the nurses able to work together with text-based materials. But with military and particularly law enforcement, we developed online decision training programs using Shadowbox so that people could work through them individually on their own time and outside of the regular classroom. Because if you try to inject the training inside the existing programs, people are saying, well, what are we going to leave out? We don't have the time. But now if you have this online material, people can work on it when they're not in classrooms. So we've developed this kind of online training capability to allow for an improvement. Now, one of the things that we noticed, particularly with law enforcement, with police officers, is the academy was usually designed. The academies are usually designed to train procedures. Here's how you handcuff people. Here's how you conduct a traffic stop. Things like that, so that you're training procedural kinds of skills. And then the assumption is after you get out of the academy, then you're going to learn how to make tougher decisions. However, for the police, by the time you send people through the academy, by the time you outfit them, by the time you've done the screening and then the training and the outfitting, there was a high washout rate. So all the money that you were spending on the training, which could be several $100,000 up to maybe even $500,000. And then somebody washes out when they leave the academy and they're working with a field training officer and they wash out, you've lost all that investment. And you didn't realize that people were not going to be able to make these kinds of tough decisions outside. So we said, you can be training decision-making in the academy. It's not just training procedures there. You can train procedures in the context of tough decisions. So you can start to have both of those things going on simultaneously. So that allows for faster training, especially of decision-making skills.
Thank you, Gary. And now we touched based on a number of applications of NDM. about training novices to bring them to expert level. And I know that in NDM society, there have been some discussions about, in general, transferring knowledge from experts to novices being more of a global issue, because we have a baby boomer generation. So there's a wave of experts. Now they are retiring in huge numbers, and we don't have enough experts to fill in their positions. Because of this, there is this global problem of transferring tacit knowledge from the experts before we lost them to the young people, so that they can come up to speed at a faster rate. Now, I think with this push, NDM scope of applications have been ever expanding. You started first with fire, police, emergency services, and then there were others like training nurses and training social workers, and then there were others which followed that. Could you please comment on how NDM applications have been expanded?
Okay, so we find not just people in my immediate company, but in the whole NDM community, people study different kinds of areas and apply these NDM principles in these areas. We've expanded to look at financial services managers, to look at nuclear power plant, and especially petrochemical power plants, to look at, I'm trying to think of some of the hospital settings, infection prevention and control kinds of activities, to understand how expertise develops in emergency departments. We never know where the next application is going to come from. So we're always having to come up to speed, learning a new domain. But what is persisting is the set of cognitive requirements that we see the same requirements again and again for sense-making skills and team coordination skills and problem-solving skills and factors like that. And we also realize that we notice these cognitive requirements, these cognitive pain points that even the practitioners haven't noticed. So we're able to articulate them and make them available for training. So I think that's what's been going on as we've expanded the field, and we've been building the whole community of naturalistic decision researchers, but we've have conferences every 2 years, alternate between the United States and the rest of the world. Since 1989, we've put on 17 different conferences, with 16 so far. The 17th is going to be this July in Auckland, New Zealand. And if people want to attend, I think it's going to be a really exciting conference. I would encourage that. And if they can't attend, I would encourage them to attend virtually. It's going to be July 1st to July 5th. And Meti, I think you have a slide someplace about.
Yes, I hear it. I hear it with the second part of the webinar when I will talk about your practical masterclass.
Okay, good.
Yes. Now I want to move on to my next question, Gary, which is something in my mind for some time. I wonder if you give me your feedback on this. That's about integration of the work carried out by different schools of intuition research. Let me show you this slide. We have heuristic and biases society. We have a naturalistic decision-making society. We have fast and frugal society. And then we have a large group of researchers who are not in one of these societies, but they do a tremendous amount of research, and they have a lot of findings and innovative products. So how can we combine all these lines of inquiries into maybe more robust and more comprehensive training programs?
So I think the answer you're looking for is that we need to work harder to combine these communities into giving a comprehensive picture. And I'm going to be skeptical about that. I don't see that happening, and I don't expect that that will happen. It's going to happen to some extent. We are reaching out to the intuition researchers. Marta Sinclair, who was at the bottom of your last slide, she is going to be one of the speakers at our next naturalistic decision-making conference so that we can form a better connection with her community. Danny Kahneman and Gerd Gigerenzer, each of them have been keynote speakers at naturalistic decision-making conferences. So we have tried. And Danny Kahneman and I wrote an article together, but that was only because he's interested in adversarial collaboration. And he and I disagreed about so many things. And he said, this would be a good adversarial collaboration. Let's see what we can come up with. And we wrote an article that's been very highly received. But I don't see the heuristics and biases community really interested in connecting with us, and we're not interested in connecting with them. I see the heuristics that they study as strengths rather than weaknesses, and I'd like them to shift in that direction. I don't see that happening anytime soon. And with Gerd's work on fast and frugal heuristics, I'm very impressed by all of the work that Gerd does, but and I've attended some of his conferences, but I just don't see the connection, in part because we're interested in expertise,
Mhm.
how it develops. And the heuristics and biases program is skeptical of experts and skeptical of expertise. So there's a mismatch at the core of it. And the same thing for fast and frugal heuristics. They're interested in the heuristics, not in the expertise. So we really are working at cross purposes. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, Mete, but I don't see a comprehensive integration anytime soon.
Gil, I want to share with you one thought I have. For instance, when you extract information, elicit information from the experts, of course, you choose the good experts, right experts, and most of that information or knowledge is good knowledge. But nonetheless, mixed with that, there is wrong beliefs, wrong assumptions, and biases, like everybody else. These good experts have too. So I'm just wondering if we have, before we transfer all this information to the novices, can we have a stage in between to increase the quality of this knowledge? For instance, there can be some debiasing, maybe from the heuristics and biasing communities know-how. Maybe there's a need to inject some fast and frugal heuristics, and maybe there is a possibility to incorporate other research done on intuition to increase the quality of this knowledge elicited from the expert, and then with that we can continue training the novices at a higher level. Does it make sense?
The short answer is no. I don't think it makes sense. Even though it sounds attractive, it sounds compelling. How can I be such a pain in the neck by trying to throw water on your grand vision? And it is a very compelling and exciting vision. I would like to partner more with the intuition community because I want to see if there are ways to train intuitive skills. But for me, intuition is based on expertise. So I think we're already trying to do that, but we probably can learn from them about how to build expertise more quickly. So I do see a partnership there. My collaboration with Danny Kahneman was resulted in some ideas about the conditions under which strong intuitions can develop, namely conditions that are reasonably stable environment as opposed to a chaotic one, and an environment where people get rapid and effective feedback. But I want to tell you, we are not trying to take what the expert knows and inject it into the novices. And we know that we can't extract all the tacit knowledge because it's tacit knowledge. So that's not going to work either. And when we use experts in Shadowbox, we don't tell the trainees, here's what how the experts think, and you're supposed to think like the experts. We don't tell them that. We say, you may disagree with the experts. And we sometimes will present material showing that different experts don't even agree with each other. So we're not trying to have that kind of imitation of experts. What we are saying is they're experts. So look at what choices they've made and look at what reasons they've come up with and try to appreciate what the reasons are. And you may not agree with their choices, and that's okay, but you can at least try to learn from them. So that's the stance that we take.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Thank you, Gary.
I think that's a more effective kind of a stance. Now, how do you get this across? You get it across by saying not everything can be boiled down to standard operating procedures and best practices. And the way to communicate the tacit knowledge to some extent, it could be captured in the incidents, the tough cases that we use for training, and it can be captured by stories. So we have just completed a project in the petrochemical industry about the use of stories to communicate how the experts handle these tough cases. And the stories provide the context and provide some of the framing that you would not otherwise get in a standard operating procedure.
Thank you. Gary, my last question in this part is about the popular subject of artificial intelligence. You had articles about this. You have written, and some other people wrote too. And how do you see naturalistic decision making work together with artificial intelligence to complement each other?
The best answer I can give is come to Auckland, New Zealand to the next naturalistic decision. There's going to be a panel on exactly that topic. But what we're doing, and we've worked on artificial intelligence issues for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, for over a decade now. And what we've developed just a few years ago is something called AIQ, Artificial Intelligence Quotient. And it's a blending of AI, artificial intelligence, and IQ, intelligence quotient. And it's a way of helping people who are going to have to use AI tools such as ChatGPT to use them more effectively and more efficiently, and to understand to some extent how these tools work. And we've just conducted a study with one of the AIQ tools, the cognitive tutorial, and we found that people going through the cognitive tutorial training for just a half hour improve the accuracy of their understanding of how these tools worked by a standard deviation in just a half hour, maybe by about 20 or 30, maybe 20% in just a half hour. So we think we can use these tools to as naturalistic decision makers to help people apply AI more effectively.
Thank you, Gary. Gary, this completes my first part questions of the webinar.